have anything you want to say to the nice people? Are there any subjects you'd like to discuss? Off. Hey everybody, it's your old pal Mike. I hope you're happy, healthy, and safe. You know, lately I've been thinking back through the years, the annals of my guitar tech history, the instruments I've encountered, and the instruments that I still remember to this day. I have worked on thousands of instruments at this point, and I've encountered just about every problem, every kind of job, every modification. But there are some special ones that stick out in my mind that sometimes I just revisit because they meant something to me, and they meant something to the people that owned them. And lately I've been thinking about this because recently the question has come to me of, what do I consider a good candidate for a restoration, and how do I decide when an instrument needs a full refresh? And there are many kinds of things that are worth considering when you were looking at a guitar for a restoration project. Things like, what repairs need to be made? What modifications need to be reversed? Are we going for vintage correct, or are we making something new out of something old? And all of these questions are valid. But one factor that I care deeply about that I don't see talked about quite as often is the question of history. And I'm not just talking about rock and roll history, I'm not talking about the brand's history, I'm talking about the personal history of the instrument. And I want to answer that question by telling you about two very special instruments that I encountered years ago. And these are guitars that I think about at least once a week because they are so special to me. The two instruments I want to talk about both had issues, and only one of them was a good candidate for a restoration, and I want to tell you why. The first instrument I want to talk about is a 1956 Fender Precision bass. Beautiful example of that mid-50s Fender bass thing that was going on, and had the Telecaster look with the giant pickguard on the upper half of the body, a single coil pickup, and a two-saddle bridge, both hidden under these angular sort of jet exhaust looking ashtrays, and more than a few hobbyist style modifications that seriously dinged the collectability and value of the instrument. One such modification ended up being about 30 holes hidden under the pickguard, drilled into the body with a drill press and a brad point bit to relieve weight. And some of you might be looking at that modification and thinking, what kind of a monster did this to such a precious instrument? And more on that later. The second instrument I want to talk about is this incredible 1969 Gibson SG Standard. It was a guitar that came into my life by way of my good friend Melissa, who bought it as a project for a handful of dollars and never got around to it. And then in 2014, we started playing music together, and I saw it in the corner of her place, and I said, what's the story with this? And she eventually sold it to me for a measly $400. Looking at these instruments on screen, which of them do you think is most worthy of a full restoration? Well, let me also admit that I'm withholding information from you. I'm not giving you the full story here. I've shown you those holes on the P-bass under the guard. But what I'm not showing you is what the SG looked like when it first showed up in my life. Have a look. Now it makes a lot more sense that I bought it for $400, right? When I found the 69 SG, it was a blown-out husk of an instrument, completely mistreated. It was missing hardware, electronics, pickups, tuners. It had nothing save for the body, the neck, and the original frets. The instrument had been sanded down to bare wood, all of its body carves rounded over poorly, and finished in sort of a thick, weird sealer that it took a lot more sanding to remove. There was a poorly repaired crack in the heel of the neck, as well as one that ran through the hole for the treble side bridge insert on the body. And the moment I saw this thing, my heart went out to it. I saw the potential of what it could be and what I believed it should be. And having owned a few SGs over the years, I just care deeply about making those things look right. A lot of folks, when they refinish SGs, don't pay strict attention to the carves and curves of the body, and that is what makes an SG look like an SG to me. That's one of the reasons that I'm not quite as big a fan as the mid-70s SGs that sort of lose all of that three-dimensional tooling. So I wanted to restore that to this horribly abused instrument, and so I did. Over the course of many many months, because I was doing this on my own time after hours at the shop, I set about the arduous and long-suffering task of bringing this instrument back to life, as I have with so many others over the years. After getting rid of that horribly thick sanding sealer, the first thing I did was restore those body contours, and I used a 68 SG that I used to own as my template. I'm happy to say that I feel like I pretty much nailed it, and I even deepened them just a little bit more than they would have been originally, because I just wanted that mean look. Along the way, I repaired those aforementioned cracks, sealed the body, and started in on some dark grain filler for the wood to accentuate the look of the mahogany. When I took this project on, Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar was still essentially a basement business. We were working out of a small area. We weren't equipped for full-on spray booths or anything like that. So, in true DIY fashion, I elected to see if I could do a pitch-perfect refin using rattle cans. So I went to Stu Mac, ordered a couple cans of amber lacquer, clear coat, and cherry red. And what I came up with, I'm actually really proud of. I think it looks great. And I'm really shocked to this day that I was able to do that just with spray cans. It all started with a few coats of cherry red, which seemed a little bright at first, but the more I sprayed and the more I let it cure, the more it darkened, and it started looking a lot more like an actual 60s SG. After a few coats of clear, I decided I really wanted to mute that color a little bit, and to my mind, the best way to do that is to add a little bit of amber, which is exactly what I did. I sprayed a few coats of amber lacquer on top of everything, and that dulled up that brightness just right. I think when you're doing a vintage refinish and you want to nail the look of an old guitar, a little bit of amber goes a long way, even on a black guitar. If you hold up an old black Les Paul into the sunlight and look at the color, you're going to see a little bit of green reflected back at you, and that's because the clear coat has aged. So if you want a cool, old school muted finish, try spraying a little bit of amber on top of that. Over the course of these long months of reworking the wood, I was also spending my time tracking down original parts, such as the lyre vibrola, the bridge, and some perfect original witch hat knobs, which I just make the look of a late 60s SG for me. The pickguard, the tuners, and the pickups, which were Lollers, were all aftermarket, but I didn't mind that so much. I didn't mind having non-original parts for those specific things. As much as I love T-tops, the Lollers are just great pickups, and yeah, I felt pretty good about that choice. Now, almost as soon as the guitar was done, it was already spoken for. My good friend Derek Bruneau in Canada, who goes by the name on Instagram DeeBeeUs, I'll link in the description down below, ended up buying that from me and still has it to this day. He posts it quite frequently, in fact, and I am so proud that I was able to nurse that instrument back to good health, and especially get it in the hands of someone that I really like. There's no better feeling than seeing my own work out there living a life of its own and knowing that I made someone really happy. And I also get the personal satisfaction of knowing that, much like a rescue animal, I took that guitar in and gave it some love and sent it back out there to bring joy to another human being. Now, it might seem obvious at this point, but I chose to restore the 69 SG because I could see that it had been mistreated. I could see that this guitar had had a hard existence, and I wanted to make it right. And that brings me back around to my ultimate point and the 56 precision bass, the one with all of the holes in it. I have to admit that once again, I'm withholding information from you, the viewer, because the person who put those holes in the bass was its former owner, the only person who ever owned the thing. Let me tell you about him. We called this P-bass Mack because the letters M-A-C-K were adhered to the top of the guitar when it first came in the old shop I used to work in before we started the Guitar Bar. The bass was brought into that shop by the former owner's family. You see, he himself was the original owner. He bought it brand new in 1956 and played it out almost every weekend until he passed away. The man was in his, I believe, late 70s or early 80s when he passed, and he was still out there. He was grinding in honky tonks. He was a well-known country bass player in the Pacific Northwest scene. And because Mac the bass and Mac the owner both had such a long history together, every modification that you see on this instrument has a purpose. For instance, when he got the bass, he carved all of the note names into the fretboard because when you're playing country gigs in honky tonks, a lot of times someone's going to come on stage and say, we're doing this song, here's the key it's in, go. And so what better way to just get yourself in the right place than look at the fretboard and go, oh, 8th fret, I need to be in C. C, F, G, you got it all right there. You don't have to think quite as much. And Mac, I know that it might be sacrilegious to see those note names carved into a vintage fretboard, but I think that's genius. That's amazing. This guy was working his ass off for, 50-something years, 60 years almost, and just made it so easy on himself. Another modification that Mac made to the bass was on the headstock. There was a nail right beside the string tree, and that's because the high G string on the bass kept popping out from under that round string tree. This may be a crude modification, but it's functional. It worked. I can say with certainty that string never moved because that nail was there to keep it from doing so. Another modification that Mac made, and I love this one, Mac... I love this. I love talking about this bass. So Mac was this honky-tonk country bass player, right? Playing long sets at honky-tonk dances. Those gigs could be extraordinarily long, sometimes like 3-4 hour marathon sessions of just playing straight through the night. And because Mac didn't own a stand, whenever the band would take a break, he'd have to lean it up against his amp or set it down on the stage. And so in an effort to not ruin the finish on the back of the instrument from setting it down and to pitch the headstock up so he wasn't knocking it out of tune, Mac installed these spring-loaded spikes on the upper horns of the bass on the back. And these little things, if you laid the bass down on the floor, these little things stuck out with just enough tension to tilt the bass upwards so he wasn't leaning it on the headstock. And I love that. That's the kind of old world solution that you would find from someone who is a mechanical tinkerer, someone who wasn't a luthier or a guitar tech, but needed a solution to a problem all the same. And I love that. I will never forget those little spring-loaded spikes. I think that shit is so cool. And this brings me back to the holes under the pickguard. I'm really happy to say that they were perfectly hidden. You would never see them on the bass. Although I believe there was one that poked through just a little bit to the back with the belly carve. I have shown numerous people that photo over the years, and every time I do, they balk. They say, what kind of person would do that to a vintage instrument? I can't believe that someone drilled that many holes under the pickguard. And they have this opinion until I give them the full context. Do you remember when I said that Mac was the original owner of the instrument? He had this bass with him through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. And Mac played that bass until right around the time that he passed away. So when you think about that, and you think about what it's like to become older and older and older and a little bit more frail with every passing year, you realize that Mac wasn't abusing his instrument, he was trying to lighten it. This guy was playing country gigs sometimes for hours at a time, and I'm nearing 40 and I still can't wear super heavy guitars for extended periods of time. Like, I know that my time being able to wear a 10-pound guitar is absolutely coming to a close. But Mac, instead of getting a new bass, instead of finding something lighter, Mac loved his constant companion so much that he took it apart, went straight to the drill press, and weight relieved it himself. And so when I look at these holes, I'm not seeing abuse. I'm not seeing, a madman wielding a Dremel. I am seeing a musician making their instrument work best for them. And I love it. I absolutely adore seeing that kind of thing done to an instrument. It's not the same as like routing a guitar that had single coils for humbuckers. It's not the same as chiseling away a control cavity so you can add a third pickup. It's fully understandable and completely valid for Mac to have done this to his own bass because he wanted to keep playing it. And that speaks to me of a relationship between a player and the instrument, a bond that's not so easily broken. And I wouldn't have changed it for the world. You couldn't have paid me enough to restore Mac. There was nothing on that bass that needed to be restored. It was perfect as is, and when you look at that instrument, there is a story just waiting to be told. Now here's where the story ends sort of abruptly. My time with the bass was limited, always would have been, because it was brought to us by Mac's family and they wanted to pass it on to a new owner because they had no use for it. That's perfectly valid. That's totally reasonable. I fully support it. And I believe the bass hit eBay at what was a very reasonable price for a new buyer, but also a very generous price for the family. I feel like we did a really good job getting them a price that made them feel at ease. So when the bass eventually sold, the buyer inquired about what we would suggest for refinishing and filling the holes and basically erasing any trace of Mac's somewhat unfortunate modifications. And again, that's a reasonable question. I'm very passionate about this bass and I didn't want to see its history erased. So I wrote a very long, impassioned email to this person begging them not to do away with Mac's history. And, after that, I never saw the bass again. I'm not really certain what happened to it or if the refinish ever happened. Deep down, I hope it didn't. I hope that my impassioned email that was never responded to changed that person's mind, and if it didn't, fair play, it's not my bass. I have no right to tell another person what to do with it. But the more I continue to think about Mac the bass all of these years later, the more and more that I hope that I run across it someday. No matter what condition it's in, I just would love to catch up with that one. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that like every couple weeks I will fire up eBay and Reverb and Craigslist and I'll just do a search. 50s precision bass, 56p bass, Mac, and I'll see what comes up. And so far, we haven't crossed paths, but I hope we do someday. So to wrap this video up, I'm going to start crying if I think about Mac anymore. But I would like to leave you with the thought that there is such a thing as good history that's worth preserving, and bad history that is worth erasing. That SG is full of bad vibes. That SG had been mistreated and messed up and left to languish in a gig bag for years. And I'm proud of the work I did, bringing it back to life as a playable and beautiful instrument. Mac, on the other hand, was a bass that was played to death. And it sounded amazing. Like, I have played P basses from every year of production, many, many, many examples, and this one absolutely had it, and I hope someday I can own a bass just as cool as that one. But the history of that bass, the notes carved into the fretboard, the spikes that kept the headstock angled off the stage, the nail in the headstock, the name on the front, the holes, erasing the marks left by a long relationship. I just felt like erasing history to me. The good kind of history. But in an effort to leave this video on a good note, here's a photo of Mac the bass with a photo of Mac the man holding the bass in the case that Mac built for it. I'm telling you, instruments like this don't come along very often, and even when they do, you don't always get the full story. I wish I had the story of the instruments that I owned. I wish I knew who owned Pancake before I came across it, because I would love to ask questions about the body wear and the incursions on the fretboard. I would love to know What happened with the low E tuner that was replaced? I want to know the stories. I want to know what the stickers were on the pickup covers. And the sad thing is, we just don't always get to know these things. But when we do, I think it's worth knowing. And I think it's worth preserving. So the next time you run into a guitar that needs a little refresh, take a moment and ask yourself, what's the story here? Because sometimes there's a beautiful story just waiting to be told, lurking there between 33 holes drilled under the pickguard, note names in the fretboard, etc., etc., etc. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourself and each other. And thank you once again for watching this video. I hope it's okay that I just kind of talked at you. It's basically what everyone does on YouTube anyway, is just talk at a camera. Nonetheless, I appreciate you being here. I can't believe that I passed 2,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for coming back again and again and again. So stay tuned for more guitar stories, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, Mac also drilled out the bass side fret markers on the neck and inlaid these gigantic, like 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch sized bits of plastic on top of them because his eyesight was failing and he was having trouble seeing those tiny black dots. See, it's stuff like that. It's people making things work for them that I love to see it.